Hello and welcome back to fourth section of selection in 3D Studio Max. In this video, I want to talk about selection in Edit Poly mode from ribbon tools. Alright, let's start. I maximize my viewport and create a plane. Collapse it to editable poly and increase subdivisions. For example, I enable polygon selection and expand my ribbon. Generally, we have two sections of selection. In Selection tab and Modeling Modify Selection. I start from Selection part and allow me to start from right to left. The right section is Selection by Numeric. Equal, less than or greater than based on sides. For example, as you see, my geometry here is fully quad. So if it is equal to 4 sides and click on select button, everything will select it. But if I create a sphere and again collapse it to poly and enable polygon mode. If this time I select equal to 4 sides, as you see, top part and bottom part of my sphere won't select it because these polygons are triangle. So I could, for example, enable less than 4 side, and this time if I select button, only polygons with less than 4 sides, which mean of course triangles, will select it. Or I could say greater than 3, which any polygons greater than 3, which mean quad or pentagon or hexagon, etc., will select it. Allow me to remove some edges here to create more sided. For example, if you see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 sides. So if I go to polygon mode and say greater than 3, except triangles, everything will select it. Greater than 4, everything except triangles and quads will select it. I think you already get general idea of how selection by numeric works. Alright, I delete this sphere and create another sphere here to have clean topology. Mirror selection by symmetry works based on all 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. If, for example, I select from top view to make sure it is exactly symmetrical, like this, and press X button, because my geometry is fully symmetrical, you will get additional symmetry selection. Or of course it will work with Y, which won't work because it is exactly from the half, and Z for bottom side. As you see, we have the X axis, Y axis, and Z. Allow me to show you for Y axis too. Alright, like this. And if I press X, we'll get additional selection symmetrical here, and of course for Z in the bottom side. Another selection here is by view grow from perspective view. If I start increasing the value, as you see, based on your current perspective view, your selection will expand it. For example, I'm going to top side of my sphere and start growing. Or if I click on top from view cube, and set on the center. Everything will cleanly selected. These options are very simple but very useful in some cases. And we have percent of distance from by pivot distance. This is totally different by view selection. But if I start, for example, decreasing the value, as you see, it slowly start to selecting. But this selection method works with your current pivot and your boundary. If I press J from my keyboard, as you see, this is my boundary. Allow me to explain how it's exactly working. I select my top part of this sphere and enable soft selection, and allow me to move up and collapse to poly and maybe increase subdivision. If now I start to set the value from pivot here, allow me to disable soft selection. As you see, now started from the longest distance to set selection. But note that this distance calculated based on your current pivot. Because my pivot here have longer distance from the top side, so my selection started from top side. But if I go to hierarchy tab and affect pivot and move it to up, and of course if you like to apply these changes, you should reset X form, and I recollapse it. Now this time if I start to, allow me to go to default value and start to reduce the value, this time from bottom side started to selecting, and when it reached to exactly middle of distance between top and bottom of my pivot, if you see, allow me to increase, yes, as you see here, now from both sides start to selecting. So for example, I do it again. I'm going to hierarchy tab, affect pivot, and align it to the center of object. Now it is exactly now in the middle of my object, and applying reset X form, collapse it to edit poly again. Now if I start to selecting, allow me to go to default value and slowly decrease the value. As you see, now both sides of my object will start to selecting. I hope you get the general idea of how it's working. As you see, it's written here by pivot distance. For example, I create a teapot here and allow me to increase subdivision. If you see from the front view, here is my pivot and it is exactly center of my teapot's body. But based on distance from the bounding box, distance from the right side, if you check, it is more longer distance from the left side. Okay, so if I start to selecting, of course my selection will start from here, because this area has longest distance to my current pivot position. All right, let's check it out. So I collapse it to editable poly and going to polygon mode. Now start to decreasing. Allow me to reset the value because it is 100, which it is percentage. So now as you see, it's starting to growing, And when the distance from here to my pivot and left side from the handle to pivot is equal, both sides will start selecting, actually expanding the selection. And now this space from both side and top side is equal. Allow me to show you how it is exactly. I could draw a circle here and something like that. Check here. Because the distance is very close together, now my selection will start expanding. You see, exactly in a circular from distance of my pivot point. All right. I cleaned up my workspace. And here we have a very useful and simple selection part by half. It is very simple. If you enable, for example, X and click on select button, as you see, your left side of your geometry selected. Allow me to isolate this object. Or you could press invert. As you see, your selection will invert it. I could select Y and select based on Y axis or invert, and of course Z. Select bottom side and top side, and again it works with your pivot distance. For example, as you see, my Z axis in invert mode selected from the half, but if I move my pivot, for example, the bottom side and reset X form, now this time if I do again, as you see, this Z half is started selecting up to middle of my axis position. Alright, in another video I explained about random selection, but let's review that quickly. We have two types of randomly selection, by percentage or by number. By default here is 25%. I could select, and each time I randomly select 25% of my geometry segments. I could, for example, set only 10%, now only 10% randomly selected, or by number. For example, I set by number and set value to 5 and click. If you count, there are only 5 polygons selected here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it is exact number. I set 3, and you could see only 3 polygons selected, 1, 2, and 3. That's the main difference. And here we have select within current selection, which it is useful in some cases. For example, I select only these region and I want to say select only 5 polygon based on my current selection, not in the whole geometry space. So I select within current selection and only 5 polygons selected based on my current selection. We have here also random grow and random shrink. I could randomly, based on my current selection, growing or shrinking. For example, I select this and this polygon, random grow and random shrink. The next section is by perspective. It is kind of similar to by view, but is based on your angle of perspective. And we have here additional option outline. If I start to, for example, set 30 degree of the angle and select, based on your current view angle, polygons will select it. And we have, of course, outline here. If I enable outline, only outer side border will select it. For example, I said 50 degree and select, or disable outline to select the whole area. Next section is binormal. Of course, binormal direction and angle, and by default is x-axis. By default is 0, and if I click x, nothing gonna select it. I set, for example, 45 degree and press enter. Based on your x-axis, as you see, up to 45 degree will select it. I reduce the value to something like 15. Allow me to set again, or 20. Everything by different angle based on 20 degree will select it. Allow me to say, for example, 60, and everything up to 60 degree difference will select it. And here we have invert button, which it is work exactly like edit menu and select invert. And of course you could change the axis, for example Y, allow me to revalue, or Z axis, up to 60 degrees difference will select. It is something similar to biangle here, as you see, but based on 3 axes up to reach your pivot point. By surface, it is very useful. Allow me to reshape my current object. For example, I enable soft selection but smaller value. Something like that here and here. And maybe some more details. All right. As you see here, we have concavity and convexity. Convex means something going outer, and concave is going inner side. So this is concave and this is convex. So here I could choose between convex and concave mode and start increasing the selection. As you see, because it is concave, all inner concave angles or bended to inside start to selecting. And if I enable convex, as you see, from the outer side start to selecting. Allow me to increase a subdivision to see better selection. All right. I think I added too much details here. Okay. So convex, from outside, I hold on the Alt or Option key to increase the value slowly. You see? I think my subdivision increased too much. Allow me to undo some of them. Okay, I think that's enough. So convex, and of course concave. Next section we have a set, which works with selection set. It is useful actually. I create a teapot here and clone it as copy, collapse both them to editable poly. I define my teapot lid as a selection, for example, cap, and press enter. So I define the name here. From the set, I could select copy, and from the list, I already defined the selection set name cap. OK. Now I'm going to teapot. Doesn't matter, select polygon or element, and select paste. As you see, automatically copied selection set with same name and same polygons to another object, which it is very useful, especially when you're trying to set some names and selection set, especially when you have multi-sub objects, something like material. Of course, it doesn't matter the name, but the geometry automatically will set selection. And here we have copy and paste selection too. For example, alright, I'm going back to my plane and isolate it. Imagine we have a selection here. I select some of my geometries here and select it as a store 1, adding another selection here and defining as a store 2. We have a stored selection, allow me to append that. You have operations something like add, subtract, intersect, or clear. If I set add, as you see, now we have both selection added to each other. I clear them and redefine. For example, I select left side of my plane. Allow me to go top view to see better. Alright, my left side is selection store 1, and this region is store 2. We could add. Now this time I'm trying to subtract. As you see, store 2 subtracted from my selection 1, and we have intersect. This is store 1. This is store 2. Now we could intersect and only common region space will remain, and we have clean, of course, and we have paste. How paste works? In several different ways, but something like that. I select this, store 1, going to another geometry and paste it. As you see, my selection from the first plane pasted into second plane. It is very useful, especially when you have similar objects but you didn't make them instance. And the last part here, we have a selection pattern by vertex angle, which it is same here, as you see, by vertex, and by angle. It is the same operator. By material ID, which it is selection set, and here polygon material ID you could set. For example, I select this part and set selection 1. Select this part, selection set 2, and the rest of my geometry selection 3. Now you could simply here set the selection or select ID. For example, 2, select ID, 3, select ID. It is the same. But here we have selection by tops. It is not so important, which I introduce selection by half, axis, random selection. But here we have open. We'll select the borders, but in your current selection type. For example, here my border is outside, as you see, and selected by polygon. I could set, for example, vertex and open. And lastly, we have here non-quad. Nothing gonna select here because my current geometry is fully quad. I could make some non-quad here, and now I will go to the non-quad. It is very useful, especially when you are trying to make clean objects, especially for games or some standard industry models like AR, VR, or you have to make clean geometry topology. And in edge mode, we have selection based on hard edges. Hard edges usually defines based on smoothing group. Allow me to create example here. I select this geometry and selecting top part and defining a new poly group smoothing. For example, this one is set number 2, here number 3, number 4, and etc. Imagine this is 5, here is 6, and of course the rest remain is polygon group 1. Now, first change you see here, we have some edges because of smoothing group are different. Here is smoothing group 2, but this section is 3, and this section is actually combined of 1, 2, and 4. It is not so important. Now here I could go to the edge selection mode and click on hard. All edges will select it when you have intersect between different smoothing group. For example, as I mentioned, you will see here we have a smoothing group 3 and the top side it is 2. So these two regions have different smoothing group. So simply you could select hard. It is very important in some case of modeling. And in the selection we have selection by pattern and by vertex, which I will explain them more in another chapter. But just to a quick demonstration here, I enable, for example, here we have by smoothing group exactly the same like previous show, but here we have a pattern. These patterns works with your current selection. I select few separated regions to show you how it's working. Actually, it's not so useful, at least to me. But for example, pattern 1, as you see the borders, undo that. Pattern 2, only the corners. Pattern 3, there are some different pattern selection. 4, 5, it skipped the border but double lined. And 6, 7, 8, and grow lines, as you see the outer border. Checker increase the selection only to the corners, and dots only remain the outer corner, and undo that. And the last one is one ring. And as I mentioned before, here we have the polygon smoothing. It is like previous show. 1, okay. Geometry based on the polygon smoothing group will select it. For example, I know this top side is 2, so I select only number 2 and okay. To finish this video, we have one more useful section in modeling, modify selection. We have grow and shrink. which I introduced in previous video. We have grow, shrink, with shortcuts are control or command page up and page down. It is similar. We have a loop and ring, similar to here, but we have additional features here. I'm going to edge mode and select one of my edges. Here it is exactly loop mode, but with clicking, as you see. But we have here some additional feature named dot loop. It is very useful when you're trying to select one each other, not continuous selection. Also for ring here, it is very useful. Allow me to expand, modify selection and pin that to see. For example, I select one edge and click on dot loop. Everyone each other will select it. Here selected, not selected, and so on. We have here dot gap. I could increase the value, for example 2, and this time, as you see, one edge is selected, two edge not selected, and again selected. So you're defining the gap. 3, and so on. Also works with ring. Just note that here in the polygon mode, if you select one polygon, you cannot use dot loop selection. If you want to work with polygon selection, you have to select at least 2 polygons to define to 3ds Max which direction you want to select. Now here I set to 1 dot gap. As you see now, working fine. 2, and so on. And of course we have loop mode and ring mode, which you could select one, hold on the control and select another one. Actually, it is not so important in new versions because you have the shortcut for quick selection with shift key, and 3D Studio Max version 2021 has also new features which I will cover in another chapter. But here we have more tools. Step loop. As you see, you could define 2 sides of the selection, one here, hold on the control, click here and set step loop. But note that you have to select in a row or column. You cannot select here and set step loop. It won't work. Also, we have a step mode. Click and hold on the control and click next. Here, click, control, click. It is useful. And here we have fill by 2 type. First of all, you could select here, control here, and fill, which you selected diagonal of your rectangle. Here, control here and fill. Also, you have fill hole. To work with fill hole, you should select correctly. For example, I'm selecting this region, and if I hold on the control and click outer side, and if I select fill hole, as you see, the outer side will select it. Undo that. And if I select one more inner, you will define I need these regions fill up. And we have outline. I'm selecting this region and set outline. So control click and fill hole. But note that you cannot select something like this selection. It won't work. If I'm click, everything gonna select, because 3D Studio Max cannot recognize what is exactly your region. So you have to define correct topology of selection to fill the holes. And we have similar here, based on edge count, face area, topology, and normal direction, which is very useful. Allow me to create a new geometry. I'm creating a cylinder and increasing side and height segment, collapse the poly. So I'm selecting 2 based on what I set. You could set dot loop, and I don't need 1. Note that my selection has no problem because my segments is not suitable for ring selection, so I undo that. So usually we need some standard subdivision, something like 36, 72. Alright, now it is perfectly selected, and I'm starting something like bevel. Okay, and inset. Now imagine you want to select everything similar like your current selection. You just need to select one sample and click on similar. As you see, everything similar to this current selection selected fine. In some cases it won't work perfectly, but usually works very fine. Alright, I think that's enough for this chapter. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more tutorials.